Hi, I'm Sharon. I had just started my adult life when this whole story started. Right after college, I got my first real job in marketing, moved into a small but completely my own apartment, and finally got a taste of independence. It was a place that could be called his own, despite the eternal problems with plumbing and an old radiator that warmed up whenever he pleased. But all these little things didn't matter, because here, behind a closed door, I could just be myself, without constant comparisons, without glances full of unspoken condemnation, without that looming feeling that I couldn't meet some invisible, but certainly strict expectations. My family was the classic embodiment of traditional values, where everyone had their own clearly assigned role, and I couldn't figure out where I fit in. My older brother Lucas was the pride of his parents, ambitious, purposeful, successful. He confidently strode up the career ladder, concluding one big deal after another, causing his father's admiration and his mother's enthusiastic sighs. His wife, Sarah, was the epitome of an ideal daughter-in-law, elegant, well-groomed, socially active, organizing charity events and flawlessly maintaining the image of the family. Each of our family dinners turned into a performance in which everyone already knew their lines. My father, beaming with pride, talked about Lucas's new success, passing mashed potatoes around the table. My mother did not skimp on compliments to Sarah, saying them with such warmth, as if she were her own daughter, and I just sat stirring the food in my plate with a fork, watching this theater of familiar roles. Sarah would occasionally give me one of her looks, the kind that could make a person feel out of place even at their own party. It wasn't just a look, it was a subtle hint of inconsistency, of carelessness in clothing, of a too simple hairstyle, of mascara that probably wasn't from an expensive boutique. At such moments, I wanted to disappear into thin air, become invisible, but strangely enough, in this family it didn't require much effort. I already felt more like a background than a full-fledged part of what was happening. Sarah is organizing another charity gala, Mom proudly announced that evening, when everyone was sitting at the table, having just finished discussing Lucas' latest victory. I raised a glass of wine, took a sip, and immediately almost choked when I heard my mother add with undisguised delight, "She has become such a pillar of society, like the daughter I never had." These words hung in the air like a heavy weight that suddenly collapsed onto the table and left deep cracks. I was here. I was sitting right in front of her. But, apparently, it was as if I didn't exist. I put the glass back on the table, feeling something uncomfortably clench inside. Sarah, noticing my reaction, gave me another of her condescending glances, as if to say, "Don't take it personally, honey, it's just a fact." Lucas, as always, remained impassive. He didn't even seem to notice what had happened. My father continued to eat dinner, the children fussed around. No one cared that I had just been stabbed in the chest. But it was at this moment, when the familiar atmosphere of the family dinner seemed to have reached its peak in predictability and indifference to me, Mom and Dad exchanged that look. The look that parents give each other when they're about to say something really important that will change everything. "We have something important for you to say," Dad began, clearing his throat, his voice steady, but there was a certain tension in it, as if he knew that the spoken words would lead to a storm. He glanced quickly at my mother, and as if confirming his determination, she nodded encouragingly, and then, nervously smoothing the napkin on her lap, a gesture I remembered from childhood, which appeared every time she had to talk about something that, in her opinion, could cause disagreement, she spoke. In his even, practical tone. "We've finally made a will." At that moment, my fork froze halfway to my mouth, and Sarah felt as if an electric shock had shot through her. She instantly straightened up in her chair, while Lucas froze, holding a glass of water in his hand, as if trying to prepare in advance for what was about to be said. "We've decided," Dad continued, his voice firm, almost detached, and that's what caught my eye the most, a kind of finality that leaves no room for discussion. "Leave everything to Lucas. The house, the cottage on the lake, all our savings." The world seemed to stop. I sat staring at my half-eaten dinner and felt something crumble inside me. They left everything to Lucas. Everything. I suddenly realized that no one at this table except me looked particularly surprised. Sarah pursed her lips, but the corners of her mouth turned up slightly, as if she had known this beforehand and was now only making sure that her expectations were met. Lucas just nodded, as if he'd just been informed of something completely natural, something that wasn't even up for discussion. "We've been thinking about this a lot," Mom continued, her voice flat and full of the confidence it always had when she made decisions that she thought were indisputably reasonable. "Lucas has 2 children to think about. They need a stable foundation for their future." I felt something rising in me between shock and pain, something viscous, like tar, that slowly filled my throat. I could barely find my voice. What about my future? The words were quieter than I'd intended, but they seemed to echo throughout the dining room. "You know I'm going to have kids someday." Mom's face made the same expression she always made when she thought I was being unreasonable: slightly strained eyes, slightly lowered lips, a deep sigh filled with patience. "Sharon, dear, this decision is final. Your father and I will not change the will." And at that moment, it hit me like a wave, taking me back in time, into the memories that flooded into my head, drowning me in the realization of the truth that I may have always known, but tried not to see. It was never about Lucas' kids. There was never a last name. It has never been said that he needs stability. It was about him. It's always been about Lucas. Suddenly, I'm 8 years old again. I'm sitting in the school hall during a piano concert and looking at 2 empty seats in the row of parents. Because Lucas had a football match that day. I'm 12. I'm holding my report card in my hands at the dinner table, but Mom and Dad don't even look at it because they admire his B+ in chemistry because he tried so hard. I'm 15. I'm crying in my room after the first breakup, and Mom is downstairs helping Lucas choose the perfect corsage for his girlfriend. I'm 16, I'm winning the school essay contest, but no one comes to the awards ceremony because Lucas has a college graduation. I'm 18, and I'm saying goodbye in front of an entire audience, but my parents are late and leaving earlier because Lucas needs help moving into his new apartment. All these moments combine into one clear picture, like dots in a drawing that I didn't want to see before. "You always loved him more than you loved me." The words came out before I could stop them. The table suddenly froze. Even the children stopped fidgeting, staring at me, as if they sensed that the atmosphere in the room had changed. "It's not about his kids," my voice was shaking, but I wasn't going to shut up. "It's not about his future. It's about how you choose your beloved child again." Mom paled. "Sharon, this is ridiculous," she sounded worried, but still condescending. "We love both of our children equally." I laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, almost hoarse. "When?" I looked up at her, not with anger, but with weariness. "When have you ever shown this? Tell me at least one time when you chose me over him." The silence that followed this question was deafening. They exchanged glances, probably trying to find an answer, trying to remember at least one moment that could destroy my rightness, but I knew they couldn't. Because there were no such moments. I pushed the chair back, and its legs creaked loudly on the floor. I was no longer going to pretend that I lived in a family where everyone was loved equally. I'm not going to try to earn the attention you've always given him anymore. I won't do it anymore. I could feel my voice trembling with emotion, but I didn't allow myself to be silenced. I didn't allow myself to break down in front of them, in front of this perfectly fine-tuned family system in which I was always something secondary, something that could be ignored without consequences. Don't expect me to come to family dinners. Don't expect me to continue playing the role of the grateful second-best child. Mom's face was contorted with indignation, her lips pressed into a thin line, and her cheeks flushed with an angry blush. "You're being selfish, Sharon," she said abruptly, as if she had slammed the table with words, hoping to discipline me the same way she did when I was a child, when any act of disobedience was punished with an icy look or strict instructions on how to behave. You only think about yourself, only about what's coming to you, only about money. I smiled bitterly, shaking my head, feeling the anger inside me heat up to such an extent that it seems like it's ready to burst out, burn all the bridges and leave only ashes behind. It's not about the money, I said, pausing, letting my words hang in the air. It's about respect. You've made it clear that you don't consider me your daughter, but you expect me to keep coming with a smile, pretending that everything is fine. Lucas sat in tense silence, staring at his plate as if that was where he could find all the answers, avoid conflict, and hide from everything that was happening. He never intervened, did not try to resolve the situation, did not even try to pretend that my pain affected him in any way. But, of course, Sarah couldn't keep quiet. "You're funny, Sharon," she drawled in her condescending, painfully annoying tone, and I felt something break inside me. "You're just acting sullen and arrogant as usual. You always make it look like you're one victim, like the whole universe should revolve around you." All these years, I've endured her subtle jabs, her mocking grins, her ambiguous compliments, which always had hidden overtones. I was silent, ignored them, tried not to react, but at that moment I realized that I no longer had to put up with this. I turned to her, and a strange calmness came over me, something I hadn't felt before. "You know what, Sarah? Don't interfere. You're not even my family. You're just a man who married my brother and for some reason decided that this gave you the right to judge everyone else." There was dead silence in the dining room. I saw Sarah's face contort, her lips tremble, and then, as if on cue, she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "How dare you talk to Sarah like that?" Mom's voice, trembling with rage, sounded unexpectedly sharp, and I saw her jump up from the table, her eyes flashing lightning, and her fingers convulsively clutching the edge of the tablecloth. "She was only kind to you." I snorted, but before I could reply, my father spoke up. He was silent for a long time, watching what was happening with an icy expression on his face, but now the same shade of anger that I remembered from childhood flashed in his eyes, the one that appeared before the punishment. "Get out." "Stop it," he rumbled, his voice sounding like a thunderclap shaking the walls. "Get out of this house right now." I got up slowly, pushing back my chair, which creaked on the floor. "With pleasure," I replied calmly, and for the first time in my life I felt free. "Don't worry, this is the last time you'll have to kick me out. I'm not coming back." I left the house without looking back. The sound of the door closing behind me was like a dot at the end of a very long sentence that ended an entire chapter of my life. 2 years passed like an instant. I met James at a coffee shop. He was the guy who accidentally took my oatmeal latte, and that minor moment escalated into a conversation that lasted several hours. He was unlike anyone I had ever known before. He listened when I was talking. I really listened. When we got married, it was the wedding I dreamed of. Small, cozy, without unnecessary pomp, surrounded only by those who really loved and supported us. James's family welcomed me with such warmth that I could barely hold back tears. His mom helped me choose a dress, his sister became my bridesmaid, and it felt more like family than anything I've experienced in recent years. I didn't send an invitation to my parents. To Lucas. To Sarah. Some relatives tried to convince me that I would regret it. They said it was my wedding day after all, that it was an important moment, that I should give them a chance. But I knew I had made the right choice. When I walked down the aisle, I saw nothing but sincere smiles and tears of happiness on the faces of those who were nearby. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I was exactly where I should be, that I was surrounded by people who really loved me, appreciated me for who I was, and not what I should be by someone else's standards. A year after our wedding, James and I were blessed with twins, a boy and a girl, 2 tiny creatures who changed our lives forever. Pregnancy was not easy. At times I felt exhausted, weak, confused, but James was there every moment, every sleepless night, Every panicked thought about whether we would be good parents, whether we would cope with this huge responsibility. When the children were finally born, their little hands clenched on my fingers, and at that moment I realized that I would do anything for them. We decided together that I would stay at home with them because my marketing career could wait, but those precious early years couldn't. We knew that time would pass too quickly, that one day we would look back and discover that they had already grown up, that their tiny feet were no longer stomping through the corridors, and their ringing laughter was no longer echoing throughout the house. I didn't want to miss a single moment, not a single smile, not a single first step or first word. The twins grew up quickly, turning our once quiet and measured house into an endless playground filled with booming laughter, joyful squeals, and constant trampling. Life gradually settled into a comfortable rhythm, consisting of games, walks, trips to kindergarten, daytime dreams, bedtime stories, and gentle hugs before bedtime. I managed to create my own little world, surrounded by care and love, a world that I did not allow the past to enter. I kept in touch with only a few relatives, those who understood my boundaries and respected them. Aunt Marie often came to Sunday dinners, helping me with the kids and sharing stories about her travels. Uncle Pete visited us on holidays, bringing boxes of homemade cakes and toys for the little ones. They never put pressure on me, they never mentioned my parents, Lucas or Sarah, they never tried to force me to take part in family celebrations. If I knew my parents would be there, I just politely declined. I held small gatherings at home, inviting only those I wanted to see, those who didn't make me feel obligated. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Tuesday started the same way as any other. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after breakfast, feeling the warm sunlight coming through the windows, hearing the children in the living room working on their next masterpieces with crayons, reasoning out loud which color is better to draw the sun. When the doorbell rang, I didn't even pay much attention to it. Most likely, it was another delivery from Amazon that I was waiting for. But when I opened the door, I froze, gripping the edge of the door tighter, feeling the blood drain from my face. My parents were standing in front of me. Sharon, Mom's voice trembled, as if it took her a lot of effort to pronounce my name. We missed you so much. I gripped the door frame, feeling my fingers turn white from the strain. Someone must have given them my address. Probably Rachel's cousin. She hinted at family reconciliation more than once during her last visit. We want to see our grandchildren, Dad added, his voice a little more restrained, but there was an urgency in it, a desire to look behind my back, to see who was inside the house, someone they somehow felt entitled to see. We've been waiting for so long. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. No, my voice was surprisingly flat, even cold. You can't do that. You can't show up on my doorstep after 7 years of silence and expect to just walk into my life. Into my children's lives. They exchanged glances. The look they exchanged at that last dinner when they announced they were leaving everything to Lucas. That look that always meant that they had made some kind of decision, that they were hiding something. I felt that something was wrong. Why are you really here? I crossed my arms over my chest, feeling an unpleasant chill run down my spine. Why now? After all this time? They hesitated. Mom opened her mouth as if to say something, but then changed her mind. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, avoiding my gaze, as if debating whether to tell the truth. Dad cleared his throat, his face tense, his lips pressed tightly together, and a faint shadow of anxiety flashed in his eyes. Something happened, Sharon. The truth about Sarah came out. She's been cheating on Lucas for years. Apparently, it was no secret to anyone except himself. Mom's tears were now pouring down like a river, washing away the remnants of her former confidence, and on her face was a mixture of humiliation, bitterness, and perhaps even fear. Lucas caught her with someone else, her voice trembled, and she clasped her fingers together as if praying for something. He checked on the kids, Sharon. DNA test. She stifled a sob, glanced at Dad as if seeking his support, but he just looked away in silence, his jaw clenched so tightly that the veins on his cheekbones tightened. None of them are his. The world seemed to flip for a moment. I remembered those children whom my parents adored, admired, and praised as models, as proof of Lucas' success, his perfect life, and his excellence. Those children, who were one of the reasons why I was cut out of my will. And now it turned out that these ideal grandchildren were actually not our relatives at all. But Mom wasn't done. "That's not all," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at Dad again, and he seemed to gather his courage and cleared his throat. "Lucas took the test himself," he said, and paused for a moment, as if choosing his words. I felt my stomach tighten. "He's infertile, Sharon. He will never be able to have children of his own." I stood in the doorway, unable to move, trying to comprehend what I had heard, while the sounds of my own children playing came from the living room, while their ringing laughter echoed through the house. The irony did not escape me. The golden child, the son who could do nothing wrong, the one for whom sacrifices were always made, for whom I had to put up with indifference, the one to whom everything was given, the house, money, the status of the firstborn, the unconditional love of parents, will never be able to have their own biological children. These kids, Dad's voice hardened, and for the first time he looked up at me. They are not our grandchildren. They never were. They're just strangers. I felt nausea rising inside me. "But your twins are different," he added, peering into my face as if expecting understanding, approval, maybe even gratitude. "They are real grandchildren. Real blood. Now we have a chance to have the right grandchildren." I almost threw up. For 10 years, these people were grandparents to those children. They went to their birthdays, bought them Christmas presents, and posted their photos on social media, admiring how smart they were, how beautiful, and how much they loved them. And now that they've been shown the results of the DNA test, they're just erasing them. Are they just crossing out 10 years as if they never happened? Do you even hear yourself? My voice sounded harsh, louder than I'd intended. Mom jerked her head up, but didn't say a word. "These kids love you. They called you Grandma and Grandpa. They didn't do anything wrong. How can you just stop loving them because of a DNA test?" "But they're not family," Mom repeated, as if that explained everything. "But my children do." She nodded, and there was so much smug calmness in that movement that I wanted to scream. I stepped away from her as if from something dirty, from something that could stain me. Mom blinked, not immediately understanding what I said. "Get out of my house and don't come back." "Sharon," Dad began, and there was a threat in his voice that I'd known since childhood, the same tone that brooked no argument. "You can't do this to us. Watch me." I closed the door in their faces, turned the key in the lock, and then leaned against it, listening to their footsteps descending the porch steps. As soon as they left, I grabbed my phone and opened my mom's Facebook page, which I hadn't done in years. The changes were dramatic. Every picture of Lucas's children was gone. All the enthusiastic posts about the best grandchildren in the world have been erased. 10 years of memories of birthdays, Christmas mornings, family trips, it all disappeared with a few clicks. I was still looking at the screen when James came home that night. He found me sitting at the kitchen table. The kids were already asleep, and I had a cup of coffee in front of me, which had been cold for a long time, but I didn't even notice it. "Rough day?" "What is it?" he asked, bending down to kiss the top of my head. I looked up at him and felt something quivering inside, stretching like a thin thread about to snap. I told him everything. About the parents' visit. About how Lucas was betrayed by Sarah. About the tests. About how my parents got rid of 2 innocent children so easily, as if they were just a bad bet, a lost game, a mistake that could be erased from memory. about how now they suddenly decided that my children were important to them. They chose Lucas when he was strong, when he was perfect, when he was someone they could put on a pedestal. And now that he could no longer be who they wanted him to be, they decided to replace him. I looked at James, waiting for his reaction, but he didn't say a word. He just sat down next to me, took my hand in his and squeezed it gently. It was only then that I realized I was trembling. When I finished speaking, I looked up at James, half expecting him to say something like, "But these are your parents," which would try to convince me to give them another chance, that he would remember his family as a family that should forgive, even when forgiveness seems impossible. Instead, he just hugged me tightly, warmly, securely, so that all the tension binding my body eased a little. "You did the right thing," he said firmly, leaving no doubt in his voice. "These Lucas kids deserve the best grandparents. And our children deserve better too. I'm with you 100%. But they just wouldn't stop. Every few days I found packages on our porch, expensive toys, designer clothes for the twins, once even 2 identical boxes with iPads. I collected them without letting the children see them, without letting them get carried away by the bright wrappers and promises of miracles, and then I took everything to a local orphanage. I won't let them buy their way into my children's lives, just like they tried to buy their way into mine. But the gifts were just the beginning. One Tuesday morning, when I brought the twins to kindergarten, I noticed a familiar car idling across the street. It was Mom. She didn't get out, didn't try to talk, just sat in the car and looked towards the entrance. 2 days later, I saw my dad sitting on a bench near the playground, pretending to read a newspaper. They never approached me directly. We were just watching from afar. Like stalkers in a bad movie. It was creepy and exhausting. I found myself looking over my shoulder at the store, choosing new routes to kindergarten, and driving through different streets every day, but they always found us. One evening, after another gift delivery, when I once again packed the boxes to take them to the shelter, I realized that I had had enough. I sat down at my laptop and started typing an email. "Mom and Dad, your behavior has become harassment. Gifts. Harassment near a kindergarten. This needs to stop. I've made my position clear. If you continue to appear uninvited in my family, I will have no choice but to contact the police. This is your only warning. Sharon." The reply came almost immediately, but not by email. A flurry of text messages from Mom. "How could you do this to us? We are your parents. Don't you realize that we may not have much time left? All we want is to get to know our grandchildren before it's too late. What kind of daughter is this who threatens her elderly parents? The police? Aren't you ashamed?" I didn't answer. I just blocked her number. But soon messages started coming from Dad. "Your mother won't stop crying. We are not criminals, we are your family. Think about what you've been doing to us in our last years." I sighed, intending to block him too, but then the last message came. It was longer than the others. "We were thinking, Sharon. If you let us see the children, we'll change the will. Everything will go to you. House, cottage on the lake. All. You were right before. We'll fix everything. Just let us become the grandparents of your children." I stared at the screen, feeling a wave of sickening disgust mixed with pity rise inside me. They still haven't figured it out. After everything that had happened, after all the years when I was nothing to them, after everything they had done to Lucas, they still thought they could buy their way into my life. Into my children's lives. And Lucas. Oh my God, Lucas. The brother who lost everything. His wife, his children, his future as a father. And now our parents were ready to take away even his inheritance from him. Just because he no longer fit into their ideal family history. I remembered those family dinners many years ago, how they praised him endlessly, how proud they were of his perfect life, how every conversation invariably boiled down to his achievements, successes, and victories. I remembered sitting there feeling like an empty seat, an extra in a play called The Perfect Son, and how easily they ignored everything about me. But at the moment when perfection broke, when Lucas' image cracked, when he stopped being who they wanted him to be, when he became a spoiled and suffering person, they were ready to throw him aside as if he meant nothing. That night, after the kids had fallen asleep, James and I sat at the kitchen table, 2 cups of tea slowly cooling between us as we discussed everything that had happened. "It's not just a will," I said, running my finger along the edge of the mug, watching the last drop of honey slowly dissolve in the cooled tea. "If we let them in now, if we accept this deal, they'll hold it over us forever." James nodded, his face serious in the dim kitchen light. "They've always had this power over you. Today it's let us see the children and get an inheritance, and tomorrow it's raise them the way we see fit, or lose everything." The decision, when we finally made it, was like dumping a heavy load that I had been carrying for years. I blocked their numbers on my phone, blocked their emails, deleted them from friends, and restricted access to all social media. For a while, they tried to find ways to circumvent the blockade. Emails started appearing in our inbox, long, full of emotion, but invariably manipulative. Once, my mother even tried to contact me by work email, but in the end, like a storm losing its strength, their attempts gradually faded into silence. Life went on. The twins went to school. James got a promotion. I started freelancing from home, writing articles and taking on small projects during their daytime nap. We were happy, really happy, in our quiet world, without drama, without toxic family dinners, without having to constantly prove our worth to those who never wanted to admit it. And then on Tuesday morning, the phone rang from an unknown number. I almost dropped the call, but something in me stopped me. "Sharon?" The voice on the other end of the phone was hesitantly familiar, but at the same time strange, as if it belonged to a man I'd known all my life but hadn't heard from in years. "This is Lucas. Can we meet somewhere? Shall we have some coffee?" We agreed to meet at a small cafe in the city center. When I went inside, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the perfectly polished, self-confident Lucas from my memories, a man accustomed to keeping his back straight and looking at the world with the unshakable confidence that had been instilled in him since childhood. Now someone else was sitting in front of me. Someone who looked really tired. We sat in silence for a few moments, both clutching our coffee cups as if they were our shields. "I'm sorry," he finally said, the words coming out quickly, as if he was afraid that if he stopped, he wouldn't be able to say them anymore. "For everything. For the way they've always favored me. For not standing up for you. For being part of the problem for so long." I remained silent, letting him speak. "I don't talk to them anymore either," he continued, looking down into his cup. "I cut off all contacts after I found out that they wanted to rewrite the will and disinherit me." I looked at him carefully. "It's not even about the money," he said, shaking his head. "It's about how quickly they were ready to throw me away." He clenched his fingers on his cup so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "For 35 years I was their son. And they could just erase me. That's it." He paused, as if he didn't know whether to continue, as if something inside him still doubted whether it was worth sharing further. "The last time I was at their house." He froze, swallowing hard, and I saw the muscles in his neck tighten. "All the photos are gone. Every single one of them." A chill ran through me. The walls were bare. Where there used to be pictures of children. The shelves where Mom kept all those frames from birthdays and Christmas. I remembered those carefully arranged photo exhibitions, how my mother spent hours moving the frames, aligning them, choosing the best angles so that everyone could see how perfect her family was. I asked her about it. Lucas looked up at me, and there was a strange mixture of incomprehension, anger, and pain in his eyes. And she just He trailed off, as if even saying it was difficult. She told me she burned them. I jerked my head up, meeting his gaze. That's it. In the fireplace. It was like she was talking about getting rid of old newspapers or something. We sat in silence. I didn't know what to say. Lucas, too. It was 10 years of memories. The first steps, the first words, the first holidays, the first hugs, the first tears, and the first ringing children's laughter. 10 years of her life, woven into the photographs that her mother carefully shelved, showing the world her impeccable family. And she just burned them. Lucas looked up at me, and this time I saw real pain in them, not the fleeting annoyance that disappears after a couple of sips of whiskey, not the bitterness that goes away after a short sleep, but a deep, indelible wound that does not heal because it was inflicted by someone who was supposed to protect. To love, to cherish. I haven't even filed for divorce yet, Sharon. His voice was hoarse, as if from a long silence or from words he had been holding inside for too long. The ink on the DNA tests hasn't dried yet, and she's already wiped it off. She was the perfect grandmother for 10 years. And she could just pretend that none of this had happened. It's like these kids never existed. As if they had never meant anything to her. I thought about all those Facebook posts she deleted. But the burning of physical photographs seemed to be something more deliberate, more irrevocable. Will? I tried to keep my tone level, even though I already knew the answer. Lucas shrugged, trying to sound casual, but I could see his fingers were white with tension as he gripped his coffee cup. It doesn't bother me anymore, he said, turning to the window as if he wanted to get away from the subject. They can leave everything at the cat shelter. I wouldn't care. He was silent for a few seconds, and then, a little quieter, he added, I just needed their support. Their presence. Their love. It shouldn't have been conditional. Looking at him now, I didn't see the Lucas I'd known all my life. This was not a golden child in front of me, accustomed to admiring glances and unconditional support, not someone who was put on a pedestal by his parents, even when he did not deserve it. In front of me sat a man stripped of all his armor, a man who for the first time in his life had to face rejection, loss, and the realization that he was valued not for who he was, but for who they wanted him to be. You know what's funny? He tried to smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes, disappearing into a weariness that seemed deep beyond his years. I finally understand what you've been through all these years. What it feels like to be on the sidelines. He shook his head, as if he couldn't believe that he could ever overlook the obvious. I'm sorry I didn't see this sooner. Sitting in that little cafe, listening to my brother, who spoke to me with such raw honesty, I felt something shift between us. The wall of privilege and favoritism, erected by our parents in childhood, began to crumble. And maybe there was hope in that. Not for instant friendship, not to erase all past grievances with one conversation over a cup of coffee. Too much water has flowed away, too much pain, too many years of life lived on opposite shores of the same family. But it was the first step. A tiny seed of opportunity. Sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I think about them, my parents, who were left alone in the end. No one comes to Sunday dinners. No one fills their house with children's laughter. No more gifts under the tree for grandchildren, no more family photos on the walls. And sometimes I feel guilty. Sometimes I wonder if I'm punishing them too harshly. Maybe I should have done something else. Maybe I could have been wiser, more tolerant, more gentle. But then I remember the burned photos. Deleted memories. The way they could turn their love on and off like an electric switch. And I understand, I'm not taking revenge. I'm protecting you. I am protecting my children from the same conditional love that was once a part of my life. Maybe someday they'll realize what they've done. Maybe they realize that a real family is not about perfect looks, meeting impossible standards, having the right grandchildren and the wrong ones, or inheritances that can be taken away and returned. Maybe they'll learn that love doesn't have to be accompanied by conditions. That love can't be undone when things don't go according to plan. But I'm not holding my breath. Instead, I focus on my family. James, who loves without counting. To my twins, to whom I promise to give unconditional love, no matter which path they choose. Building a house where memories don't burn out when they become uncomfortable. Where love is not used as a bargaining chip. Where everyone will be seen and appreciated for exactly who they are. And perhaps there will be a place in this house for a changed golden child who finally understood what a real family means.